Well, we're going to bring in somebody from the top 1%, and we're going to talk to them. Peter Schiff is a successful businessman. He's made apparently $64 million. He ran for Senate in Connecticut. And we had you on the program on the Young Turks when you were running, Peter, I remember. I'm glad to have you back. You went down to Occupy Wall Street, and you started a debate with those guys. One, what in the world were you thinking? And two, what is your point against the 99%?
Apparently, I have to now do the same thing with you guys. You know, you can't paint the 1% with that banker brush. Yeah, there are some people in the 1%, the vast minority of the 1%, who got rich off of government bailouts and from the Fed. And that ought to stop. And you ought to direct your outrage at the Federal Reserve, out of the U.S. government. They're the ones that are funding all this. I wanted to let the banks fail. I wanted to let people lose their jobs. And you have to remember, the financial crisis had its roots in bad monetary and fiscal policy and bad regulatory policy. Some of these bankers were involved, but it was the government that led them to it.
All right, so Peter, a couple of things there. Number one, you say you got to blame the bankers. Well, I couldn't agree more. I didn't quote Steve Jobs. I didn't go after Bill Gates. I didn't even go after Warren Buffett. None of these guys, okay? So it's not an attack on the rich.
Warren Buffett got bailed out, too, you know. He was a big shareholder.
Well, that's actually true.
That got bailed out.
That's actually true. That's a good point.
He's got a lot of bailout money.
That's not a bad point either, and his ratings companies are a disaster and led to some of this collapse as well. But we don't go after just rich people. I quoted all the people in the financial industry, people like Jamie Dimon who took money, plus the guys from the Home Depot who say, oh, yeah, the average guy should pay more taxes than me. I should get a 15% rate on capital gains, dividends, and carried interest. That's a crime, man, to have the richest people in the country pay 15%. How do you justify that?
Well, most of them aren't. I agree with you that we shouldn't have a preferential rate for hedge fund managers. I think we should get rid of the carried interest, but I'd like to get rid of the income tax for everybody. But as it stands right now, I am paying a fortune in income taxes. I'm paying, if you add all the taxes I'm paying, about half the money I earn is being paid in taxes. I don't qualify for that 15% rate because I don't earn my money that way. And the vast majority of people in the 1% are paying enormous rates of taxation. And not only is this unfair and immoral, but because taxes are so high, fewer businesses are created, fewer jobs are created, fewer goods are produced,
are you talking about
and
taxes?
Everybody suffers, especially the members of the 99%.
That's simply not a fact. That's not true. Taxes are at an all-time low.
No, they're not. You're just totally wrong.
The effective tax rate is the lowest it's been. It's certainly since the 1950s, I believe all the way back to the 1920s.
No, it's not. You're completely wrong.
All right, well, you know, we'll do fact-checking. We'll have PolitiFact or somebody looking into it.
No one paid income taxes at all because
you're totally not correct.
And, you know, the average American didn't pay income taxes until 1943 when we had the withholding taxes. But there was a period of time, the 1950s and 1960s, 70s, where tax rates were higher, but people didn't pay those rates. It was so easy to get deductions that few people were paying those taxes.
All right,
the vast majority of income was taxed at a much lower rate back in the 1950s and 60s than it is today.
No, okay. Let me clarify on two things.
Wrong.
And no, you're wrong, but we'll get independent people to check it out.
Yeah, I'm not wrong.
Okay, all right, listen, we can keep yelling back and forth about who's wrong. Let me just state some of the facts, and then I want to ask you about your central premise, okay? First of all, the taxes were lower at 28% at one point at the very end of Ronald Reagan's term, right? So as a percentage for the highest bracket. But for most of our history, taxes have been actually until the 1980s were in the 70 to 90% range.
That's not most of our history. For most of our history, there was no income tax at all.
No, I'm saying the time that we have had income tax. And second of all, the effective tax rate is as low as it's ever been right now, certainly since the 1950s. All right, we disagree on that. We will have people look into it. I want to go into your central premise.
I want to go to your central premise. From one business against your wages. You can't do that now. We don't have the types of deductions that we used to have.
Peter, we have to move on from that because you're wrong and you keep insisting. So let's move on.
So, Peter, if you think people were actually
I want to go to your central premise. You are dead wrong. Please stop talking about things you're not right about.
If the government was going to take 60 or 70% of his income, he wouldn't. No, I wouldn't do it.
Peter, I got to ask you the last question about your central premise. You say that it is the government that is the problem because they're the ones that give out the money to the bankers, etc. You say you're against the bailouts. But why do you think the government does that? You think they want to just help the bankers out of the goodness of their heart? No, because they're bought by the bankers. For example, President Obama, his largest donor is Goldman Sachs. Every single one of these guys takes a huge amount of money from the bankers.
If you want to stop that, you got to take the power away from the politicians.
Peter, you got to let me finish.
As long as they have power, people are going to line up to buy it. Take away the power. And
so
the other
are you saying the bankers are not guilty of this at all?
So
isn't the problem that the bankers
the vitality of the free market?
Okay.
We don't have the benefits of capitalism anymore because we don't have capitalism. We have a centrally planned socialist economy, and that is why the average American is getting
with that load of crap.
If we want to change that circumstance,
Peter, I'm done with you.
If we want the middle class
no, you guys don't get it. I'm done with him. He's done. Move away from him. Okay, bring him down. He won't shut up, okay, and he doesn't listen to facts. We will have, don't take my word for it, we will have an independent analysis of the effective tax rate today, and we will show you on our website, on current.com/The Young Turks, what the tax rate has been since the income tax began. And second of all, he wants to blame the government for the problems, but he knows it's his banker friends who have given those donations, who buy their senators, who buy their staff members, so they can get more money. He doesn't want you to pay attention to that, because that's how they rob you. And he comes on here and he will go, oh, no, it's socialism. Socialism, my ass. The real problem is, and he's talked about this in the past, but he didn't talk about it there, corporatism, where the corporations come in and steal and rob us blind in exactly the way that I showed it. But he doesn't want you to know that because he wants to keep sucking the money out of the system. All right, we'll be right back on the Young Turks.
You know, yesterday I happened to be on a television program on cable TV, a channel called Current TV. And this is Al Gore's new venture into broadcasting. And the show that I was on is The Young Turks, which began on YouTube. The host, Cenk Uygur, I guess is how you pronounce his name, did a brief stint on MSNBC and then left. And now he's on this Current TV. And I had not been on the show. I had been on The Young Turks at some point, I think one time. And so I did this show last night, just before I did the Lou Dobbs show on Fox Business. I did this brief hit with the Young Turks. And, you know, basically they brought me on to talk about the 1% and Occupy Wall Street. And before I got to speak, Chet was reading this article that I mentioned yesterday, or Shank rather, was reading this article that Bloomberg wrote, where a lot of bankers, Wall Street types, are interviewed defending the 1%. And unfortunately, Bloomberg, most of the people he talked to, including myself, were in the financial industry, although I didn't get any government bailouts, but a lot of the people who they were talking to were among the recipients of government bailouts or are among the 1% who are fortunate enough to earn their income in such a way that they only have to pay 15% tax. That is the loophole that is there that gives a special break for carried interest. And it has wide support among Democrats and Republicans who like to talk about how it's not fair that the richer are paying less taxes. Of course, they're always talking about these particular rich, but of course, they do whatever they can to protect that tax break. So, of course, they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. But unfortunately, the people that are featured in this Bloomberg story are all pretty much from finance. And so he went one after another going over these individuals, kind of making fun of them for the things that they're saying. And he's basically trying to paint all of the 1%ers with this brush, as if everybody who's in the top 1% is paying hardly any income taxes, is getting all kinds of government subsidies, all kinds of bailout money, is just feeding off the public trough, and that's everybody in the 1%. And of course, I'm trying to point out, they're not even 1% of the 1%. You can count those people. There's not a lot of them. The people who are physically living off of the government bailout money and the Federal Reserve. This is a tiny fraction of the 1%. The vast majority of the people in the 1% are paying very high levels of taxes, and these are the people who are creating all the jobs, who are really the linchpin of the U.S. economy. They're the ones that are getting up early in the morning, the last ones to leave their offices. They're the ones that make it all work. They're the conductors of the free market symphony. They put all the pieces together. They put the land, labor, and capital together, and they make it all work. They're the ones that risk their capital. They're the ones that sign all the paychecks. They're the ones that don't make anything unless everybody else gets paid first and there's something left over. So without the entrepreneurs, without these individuals, the whole economy would simply implode. Yet, Cenk Uygur doesn't want to give them any credit. Anyway, I'd come on there and try to talk about it. It's very hard, to get a word in there. And so I'm trying to speak about how, hey, it's not, don't blame the Wall Street bankers for the bailouts. And I told them, look, I'm on your side. I'm against these bailouts. I was against them before you even knew they were coming. I was against the bailouts. But I don't blame the banks for taking the money. I mean, why wouldn't they take the money? You'd have to be an idiot not to take government money. If the government went to Cenk Uygur and said, we feel that you had a bad year last year. We think you're a good guy. We appreciate what you're doing. We decided to give you $50 million. Here's the check. Do you want it or not? I mean, would he turn it down? Does anybody think he would turn that money down? In fact, if he turned it down, he'd be an idiot. Anybody that turned down that money would be an idiot. If the government offered me $50 million, $100 million, of course I'd take it. Why wouldn't I take it? I mean, of course, if the government's going to give me $100 million and I turn it down, well, they're just going to give it to somebody else. It might as well be me. I don't blame people for taking money from the government. I blame the government for giving them the money in the first place. Just like when it comes to unemployment compensation. I don't blame people for not looking for work, for turning down jobs because they'd rather collect unemployment. It makes perfect sense. I mean, that's human nature. I don't blame people for acting in their own self-interest. I blame the government for doing that, for creating that incentive, for giving them that option. Part of the hypocrisy of the liberals who want to blame the bankers for taking the bailouts, when it comes to the mortgage markets, they never want to blame the borrower for lying on his loan, on his no-doc loan, for buying a house he couldn't afford. They want to blame the banks, right? They want to say, well, you were predators. You're the ones that made the loans. Don't blame the victims here. Don't blame the people who just took the money, the homeowners. Well, that's the same thing, right? If you're going to say that we should blame the banks for giving money to homeowners that couldn't pay it back, then why not blame the government for giving money to the bankers? Right? Be consistent. At least consistently blame the same party. See, I'm the same way. I'm not blaming people for gambling with other people's money. I'm not blaming people for lying on their mortgages to buy a house. After all, they were convinced that they would get rich. All they had to do is sign a piece of paper, put down some phony numbers, and they got a ticket to Easy Street. The money was going to start rolling in. The fault was in the banks for making the loans, but why did the banks make the loans? Because the government guaranteed them. The government didn't guarantee them, the loans wouldn't have been made. So I'm consistent. The liberals are inconsistent, and that's probably the nicest thing you could say about them. Anyway, I'm going to continue this discussion and take some of your calls. If anybody saw this thing on the Young Turks, it's over on YouTube. Maybe give us a call. Let me get your impression. And I'm going to read some emails I got from people who saw that, critical of me. We're talking about my appearance on the Young Turks. Now, one thing I just want to say, if you look at the show and, that at the end of the show, he did cut me off. And I wasn't exactly sure why he cut me off until I was able to see the clip. And I know he had asked me a question that I didn't answer. The reason I didn't answer it is because I couldn't hear him. I told the producers of the show before it started that I was having problems with my earpiece and I could barely hear anything that was being said. So I said that the host or anybody is going to have to speak very loudly in order for me to hear. And so he tried to ask me a question while I was talking. I couldn't hear a thing that he was saying, so I just assumed that I was going to continue to answer the previous question. Now that I actually heard the question that he was trying to ask me, I would have loved to have answered it on the air if I heard that he had said it. But unfortunately, I didn't. Now, if you're watching the show, it might appear that I'm rude because I'm talking and ignoring what he's saying. I didn't know he was talking. And, of course, I can't see him. I can't see his lips. I can't see his hand gestures. So I'm sitting in a room all by myself. And if I don't hear anything in my earpiece, I have no idea that he is trying to ask me a question. So, I wasn't trying to avoid his question. I would have loved to have answered it. I just didn't know that he asked it. But anyway, what I want to do is read to you the mail that I got, and all of it negative. And I didn't get a lot. I only got 3 emails, but I'm going to read all 3. I don't want you to think I'm cherry picking them here. But here's the first one that I got. Quote, saw you on the Young Turks. Boy, are you full of yourself. If by socialist capitalism you are referring to socializing the losses and privatizing profits, I would agree with you. Otherwise, you are just plain full of crap. Nothing but whining Republican talking points. Suck it up, dude. Don't like paying taxes? Move somewhere else. Move somewhere else if I don't like paying taxes. Well, is that really what the left wants? Now, does anybody like paying taxes? I don't think the poor or the middle class like paying taxes any more than I do, even though I'm paying a much higher percentage of my income than they are. But do the left really want the people who don't like paying taxes, which I would say is every employer in this country? Should we all leave? Is that what they want? Do they want everybody who runs a business, right, to just leave the country? Do they want the country to be full of just people looking for work, but nobody willing to hire them? Is that what they want? Because I hear when people say that, hey, you don't like paying taxes, leave. Well, maybe what would it be like if all the people who don't like paying taxes left? Who'd be left? The people who want welfare. That's it. But where would they get the money if the people that are paying the taxes leave the country? Anyway, that was from Mike in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Here's the next one. Comes from Jay Trevor, I guess, in Del Mar, New York. Here's what he writes. Your greed knows no bounds. It is the most disgraceful thought pattern ever. It's inhuman beings like you who have brought this nation to the mess it's in now, and you are the reason people are dying and losing all. Your ideas are insane, wrong, and harmful. Propaganda is ugly. So, what do you really think? But so people like me, I'm responsible for bringing the country to its knees. And I guess by people like me, you mean businessmen, entrepreneurs who start companies from scratch, who provide services, who produce products, who hire people, who pay all the taxes. We're the ones that have brought the country to its knees. What about the people that are living off of handouts? The people who are just collecting welfare checks? What did they do? What did they do for the country? Are they the real backbone of the country? The people feeding off the public trough? They're the backbone? The people filling it up? They're the ones that are the problem? I mean, come on. Here's this last one from Rich Fairbanks in Jacksonville, Oregon. I just saw you on the Young Turks. I think I can help you understand the rage and the revulsion. I will do it by analogy. I work in a forestry. Good work, but there are a few minor annoyances. A couple of times a year, as I get ready to jump into the shower at the end of the day, I find it tick. I immediately pull it out, flush it down the toilet. I believe this is the natural revulsion an organism feels when it finds there has been an attempt to parasite it. That is how people feel towards you and your ilk. At current tax rates and under current campaign finance laws, you are a social parasite. Rich Fairbanks in Jacksonville, Oregon. So wait a minute. So I'm a social parasite. See, a parasite is an organism that feeds off of another organism. People like me, we're the hosts. See, he's got it backwards. I'm not the parasite. I'm the host. People are feeding off of me. I am paying taxes. The government has taken half my income in taxes. You think about the millions of dollars I personally pay every year in taxes, but not only the money I pay. What about all my employees? What about the millions and millions of dollars a year in taxes my employees are paying? Where are they getting that money? They're earning that money because I created the jobs. So I am personally responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars of taxes paid into the federal treasury. How does that make me a parasite? Who are the parasites? The parasites are the people who are cashing checks from the government, not the people who are writing the checks to the government. And it's amazing how so many people want to criticize me. And I ask them, hey, How many jobs have you created? How many people have you hired? Why don't you stop criticizing the people who are creating the jobs and get off your butts and go create some jobs on your own? Why don't you do something for the country for a change instead of just blaming the people who are carrying the burden that they're not shouldering a big enough share of it? Meanwhile, you're in there riding in the cart, doing nothing, complaining that the people pulling the cart aren't pulling it fast enough, and then calling them the parasites. Anyway, so I actually answered all three of these emails.